Welcome to the AD Rundown. Before I get started, really wanted to show off this book called The Search, an insider's novel about a university president. Maybe I'm a little biased because it's written by Thomas Ehrlich, the former IU president from the 90s and early 2000s. And it's a book I read about a year ago. And a lot of what I'm going to talk to the audience about today is about AD searches. And this is a book that pretty much pulls from his time as a president, but it kind of humorous at times, but it really talks about the perspective of a president. But I really think who benefits from it is an AD. And the reason is because this is the search about an athletic director and a football coach and it being the same position. Obviously, that doesn't happen anymore. But there's board of trustees drama, there's committee drama, there's institutional balance of what else you have to do. And I just think one is very accurate with how to teach like institutional knowledge of things of higher education. But it's almost like a case study for hiring a football coach or being the AD at a time like this. So there's some things that, I mean, the football coach dies at the 50-yard line. It was not a good person, but he was loved by the university. So there's a lot of back and forth in it, but still, you can really learn a lot from the read. I recommended it to Dr. Kevin White after he was on the podcast as a book, and he said he's going to order it. So we'll have to see what he thought about it sometime. Okay, so things I want to cover today is my response or reaction from Ryan Alpert's press conference and Angel Cabrera, President Cabrera's press conference. The Marshall AD search reaction, CollegeAD mentioned there was 5 AD finalists visited campus last week. And then also want to talk about different approaches to the job. Utah State, which I think is really clever, and then Rutgers, and where do they go from here? So once again, the AD rundown is just me reading things, reaction to things based on my own data and research, see how things mesh. So let's get into what I thought of Ryan Alpert's press conference. For one, still kicking myself that I didn't predict him as the AD, but it was very hard to get that right. But if you look at the profile, it really does feel like he went with the J-Bat type of profile again. President Cabrera, the same type of playbook, and I just think it was great. But what I really thought about, someone had asked President Cabrera, and he didn't get asked a lot of questions, but he talked initially about raising the competitive excellence and investment into athletics to match the academic prestige, which a lot of people, if you don't realize, Georgia Tech is very prestigious, and it sort of felt like an annoyance of an AD leaving for another school instead of turning it into one of the best. And then someone had asked him, how do you make sure you keep Ryan here long term? And so that we're not here again in 2 or 3 years. And the quote in here was, the opportunity that any athletic director has at Georgia Tech, the opportunity is unmatched. We have already one major capital project that is halfway. We have renovation of the stadium. Honestly, if I were in Ryan's shoes, there's not many opportunities like this where you can make a difference and own the difference and have that sense of pride that 4 to 5 years from now, you can look back and say, I did that. I helped build that. That is the best thing we can offer any ambitious athletic director is a project that they can lead and be incredibly proud of, and we have that in spades. I thought that was just for a president to be that honest and talk with a quote just off the cuff about that question. I thought that was awesome. No one's going to blame Jay Batt for leaving. I mean, and Ryan Alpert was even appreciative of how great Jay had been for the department and that he can kind of feel at ease taking the reins from there. But the other thing I thought about with as far as how Ryan Alpert did in his press conference, he talked about how we invest in a program should be correlated to the evaluation of the program and the head coach. So there are still scoreboards for that can measure things, but we to help keep people accountable. But he was asked really about how you judge a program, and I thought that was not something you probably get a lot at an AD press conference. But I thought that was a really good answer to that, and how you invest in baseball for your league, don't be surprised if they're not winning the league. And he didn't use baseball as an example. I'm just using that as an example. But I did think that was kind of interesting that he kind of showed his approach there and his thinking. He really had a calm demeanor. I think he had a great presence alongside President Cabrera, showed his personality in ways with subtle jokes towards President Cabrera, not getting a lot of questions, and then for his three daughters sitting quietly when he was thanking his family, and that got a laugh. But really, just even keeled is you always wonder how much athletic directors practice and how many times they've practiced for this opening statement. Not a lot of energy in the talk, I feel like, but it was almost more of a confidence thing. He did he didn't really need to do anything differently, but it was a good interview, or a good opening interview and statements, and but yeah, just not a lot of energy there. But I really do think it was more of a confidence, like, hey, like I'm ready for this. But his answers to everything were right on par with what I think you would want. Nothing really stood out as lackadaisical or not answering fully the questions. So thought that was really cool. And Marshall, the AD search reaction. So College AD put out, and then I saw it in the ticker that five AD finalists visited campus, four sitting ADs, and the fifth is a Power Four executive. So that probably means a deputy AD. There's no word on a timeline. The first thing that stood out to me is that I'm surprised four sitting ADs would be okay doing a campus interview while they have AD jobs. It's one thing, I think, if you're, one of two candidates, but one of five and doing that as a sitting AD seems like a risk. And it makes me wonder if this is really an off-site interview and then just a discrete campus tour. Marshall's not a huge campus, but it is a small town. Huntington, I mean, I don't know that anyone would notice you necessarily that you're a sitting AD, that people would notice it. We don't know if it was an FCS AD, FBS, non-football, which I doubt that, but who knows? But I was still kind of surprised. So it makes me wonder if they really actually did go on campus, and that nobody has leaked the names. Maybe they just are nice and don't want to leak the names, but kind of surprising listening to that aspect of it. And then how does the final five stack up against my Marshall prediction back in June? And Jeff O'Malley was my prediction, which it was probably such an obvious that it won't happen at this point, because I think if he wanted to come back or they wanted him back, then the search wouldn't have taken this long. And I don't think they would have brought five people to campus if they really did. So I'm thinking Jeff O'Malley's probably not. He's the AD at Lamar, spent 20 years as kind of the top number two at Marshall, and was the interim whenever the outgoing AD was hired but the current president was not there most of that time. So it's just kind of an interesting. I think the president started after the interim role was pretty much that they decided they were going to go external. The way I read into that, and then I did mention in my prediction that I didn't think an industry outsider would be selected because the position profile was kind of how it was crafted and worded by Car Sports. So I got that right apparently. And then I said that data of recent hires suggests about one-third likelihood it was a sitting AD and another one-third likelihood that it would be a Power Four deputy. So if you take that into effect of who they brought onto campus, supposedly, then that's spot on, at least trending in the right direction that it's one of those two, which I know there's not a lot of choices. That's pretty broad strokes, but the I'd be somewhat surprised if a sitting FBS AD took the Marshall job. So if it's not Jeff O'Malley from Lamar, which not FBS, but then I do think that those sitting ADs are probably FCS ADs if I had to make an assumption there. And so it'd be interesting to see who that is. Now, the P4 executive candidate is interesting to me. I have a profile of deputies that I think will likely become AD candidates in the next few years. And so I'm trying to build out that the more robustness of that profile instead of just names and like how long they've been there and what their area is. So I spent some time looking at that, and I suspect it would be a big profile school deputy that's ready to take over. But I also think those types of deputies will wait for other P4 AD openings at this point. You look at Ryan Alpert, waiting in as the number two and really just been at Tennessee, but been at a lot of other places, but kind of waiting for the opportunity at a Power Four like a Georgia Tech. So those don't come open tons, but if you're at a top FBS school as a top deputy or even the number three person, I don't know that you would be looking for the Marshall AD search. And the only reason I say that is also because of what's happening with the outgoing AD and the contract not being renewed. What happened with the football coach last year, coaching and winning the league on his last year of his contract, and then both schools parting ways. I mean, it seems like everybody at Marshall loves the president, and that there's a lot of alignment with the board. But you know, you almost think Marshall is going to hire someone that fits the profile of Marshall. And so that is another reason I don't think a Power Four deputy. So if it talking about P4 executive, maybe if it's unless it's in that region of the mountains, then maybe it's a number three person that has some ties to Marshall that or West Virginia that I'm just not thinking about. So I thought that was interesting. It does lead me to believe that if it is a deputy, that I think it also could be someone that already has some AD experience because I do think that they will stick with someone with AD experience. And so if that was going to happen, you look at almost someone that was an AD, went to be a Power Four deputy. There's only been a handful that have done that. I think like 13 people when I looked at the data in the last 5 years. But now someone that maybe they thought that, but now they want to be the AD again, or they don't see a pathway to the AD chair back at the school they're at now. And so, does that fit someone like, Ken Halpin at Purdue, who was the AD at Winthrop, or Jason Budakofer from UConn, who was previous AD at Southern Utah, and then deputy AD at both Purdue and Washington? So, it would be interesting to see if they go that route. Not saying it's necessarily those two, but kind of just thinking in my head of examples of who I know that like fits that type of pathway. So it'll be interesting. I do think they stick with someone with AD experience, but when I was studying the kind of the ADs or deputy ADs and trying to get into more of their profile, I did kind of think of one more name that would be interesting fit, and that is Kelly Zen, the executive deputy AD and COO at LSU. She's been there since 2022. Their AD is not going to go anywhere, you would think. And then their president just left. So I was wondering, the reason I was looking up LSU staff directory is because I was looking into what I'm about to talk about, the Rutgers AD search, because the new president at Rutgers just came from being the president at LSU. And but that led me to seeing Kelly Zen, and she had served as the deputy at West Virginia University. She's at a West Virginia University grad, and then she's also been at that department for several years, besides just the years as a deputy. So she kind of worked her way through there. There's so much on the senior leadership team at West Virginia. Obviously, she wouldn't be going there with Ren Baker leading that department, but maybe she's ready to become an AD, and maybe that is back in her, kind of home state of West Virginia. So that would be another interesting name. She did serve as the interim at LSU, or excuse me, at West Virginia back in 2015 too. So, is there some ties there to West Virginia that make her maybe the candidate that I didn't think about? So it'll be interesting. Now, the last two things I want to talk about are the AD approaches to the search. And Utah State announced Sandy Barbour, multi-stop AD. She's now retired, working for Huron Consulting, or she's retired from athletic director. She was obviously most recently at Penn State, but she's with Huron Consulting, and it sounded like based on the statement of the article. I mean, I know it said that Sandy Barbour was going to be the interim, but it also kind of tipped their hat that Huron Consulting is helping with this too. And that made me think like, they've got Kevin White too. And so they've got other people working in that division. So it's very interesting because if you think about it, there's been a lot of AD retires in the last few years. And I wonder if we'll see more of these approaches for interim roles, plus assistance in guiding them forward with their actual search. And so instead of just hiring a search firm to do the search, what if you brought in some of these recently retired athletic directors as consultants, but as a kind of a package deal, and they got you at least some strong footing. Remember, we talked about Utah State. They had some, a lot of turnover at both the president role and at the athletic director role in the last few years. They've dealt with some stuff. Well, Sandy Barbour knows how to deal with some stuff, and so does Kevin White. And so that almost makes sense why it's Huron Consulting, right? So if it's Sandy and Huron, or if it's just Sandy temporarily, seems like a great idea. I really wonder if this is going to be something that more people should do. I'm really curious about how it was decided because Utah State does have an interim president right now. So I love the decision because they also don't have anyone on staff that seems to fit what you'd want in an interim steady leader position. So it just seems like a brilliant move by Utah State, and it makes me wonder, why doesn't this happen more often? We see a lot of interims have, a lot of ADs became that way recently in the last 5 years through the interim role. But that's only if you have someone that can do the job. And so maybe they just realize that. But I am curious, like if it was Huron reaching out, it was very clever. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward how long in this role, obviously. What's the runway? Does it lead into helping them find the next AD? Or is it just, hey, we want you in here until we hire a president, and then we want the president and the search committee to take over the AD job? I don't know how many AD searches, or if any, if that's what Huron does. I really not too familiar outside of having Kevin White on recently and reading the book that Huron published from him. So it's just a good idea in my opinion. Maybe it's a situational only type of thing. Then I want to end it on the Rutgers AD search. So there was articles put out that the pro sports executive that they had been targeting had withdrawn his name. What's interesting is I wonder, I'm sure it wasn't a super secretive thing, but really shortly after his name was leaked as who they were targeting, I think he withdrew just a couple of days later. And so that is something that how often, these outside the industry people, until their name is mentioned in something like the ticker or starts getting popped up in these articles, um, you wonder if that is going to scare people away from taking them or even talking about them if their confidentiality gets broken. So I don't know anything. I don't know a lot about pro sports executives. It's definitely something I'm trying to study. Information is not as accessible as in college athletics when we're trying to kind of read the room, lay of the land of executives out there. But I thought it was interesting. Uh, There was also articles mentioned how they'll probably still have to be going down this route, and it seems like the other people they're looking for is still fitting this route. And I do wonder if they've kind of push their way or back themselves into a corner based on what the search firm CEO and the institution has kind of talked about. The CEO of Turnkey had said about the search, quote, pioneering a new profile and a new structure inside the Department of Athletics, and also mentioned that they'll be looking for a strong number two because you have to look at who is on the current team, see how can you then support the athletic director because it can't be a one person doing everything. Well, Rutgers has lost a lot of senior leadership. I mean, this job's been open for like a year. I think it's into its 12th month almost, if not already. And so it'll be interesting to see. Sounds like what they're going to be doing is bringing a sitting AD, and if I had to guess, their number two is a sitting FBS, or excuse me, bringing a new AD from outside college athletics, and then that number two, if I had to read through the lines based on the level and what we've seen at other places, like just at Maryland, for example, the number two is probably a sitting FBS athletic director. You're looking at a pay raise. You're looking at kind of getting to be at the Power Four level or the top two level if you're talking about being a Big Ten. So you assume the number two is going to be a sitting FBS AD, probably from the group of five. So that'll be interesting. But I'm still just kind of curious. I mean, not making any predictions of who that pro sports executive type of role would be because I have no idea. But based on where they're at, once again, situational. Maryland did this route. Sounds like they're doing a similar approach. So maybe it's, that wanting to get that New York area, or just, there's a lot of people in the New York area that could fit that mold of what you're looking for. Now, the new president, William Tate IV, which by the way, I love that his wife is a gospel singer, like worship singer, and does Bible studies on YouTube, like 115,000 YouTube subscribers. Just listened to a couple of her songs. She's awesome. I'm big into the Bible studies, big into the worship music. So that was pretty cool to see. But getting back to her husband, President Tate the Fourth, he started officially in July 1st, but he'd been selected, I think, in mid-May. So he's been at several P4 schools. So he was LSU's president leading into this. He's also had leadership positions at South Carolina, TCU, and Wisconsin. He did his doctorate at Maryland. I do wonder if he really wants to go with an outsider, the like kind of the outside hire from outside the industry, or maybe it was a directive by the board. They definitely have that prerogative. It's not saying either is right or wrong, but it does make you kind of wonder if him officially being in the role, and then if their top pick took his name out, if they're number two or number three, where will the president and the board and the search firm turn? They have a great search firm. Sure, they have a great board, so it'll just be interesting. But it has been a long time. When I was looking at number two across the country, their profiles, Sarah Baumgartner from Texas, she had spent several years as a deputy AD at Rutgers. So I'm just kind of curious, not sure if the current SEC kind of mixed in with the president that used to be in the SEC, if there'd be any ties there. But obviously, she'd be a great leader for that to if they go with the traditional route. So that is kind of the interesting part to see what Rutgers does. And that is all I have for the AD rundown. Thank you.